outside the browser or onto the desktop, I can do that using Adobe Air. Things like SQLite in offline mode, things like the ability to do notifications. So if I have a social networking application like TweetDeck, one of the most popular social networking applications, I can use that to show someone when my application should have their attention. Things like this that are difficult to do outside the browser, without being outside the browser. In 1.1 we added language support. In 1.5, all the features of FlashBlare 10 came to Adobe Air. So we made sure that there was a good alignment between those two versions. And now we're working on 2.0, where we're doing a lot of investment across Android, the work for iPhone, and really making sure that you can reach more screens with Air. Lots of people building Air applications today, so I won't go through all of them, but the idea here is that we see a lot of interesting Air applications. The BBC uses this, so you can run an application outside the browser and view in a protected manner any piece of content from the BBC at all. So anything that the BBC publishes, you can view in their BBC iPlayer. The White House is using an application that we built called Adobe Directory, which shows you where people are and helps you find them on a map. There's a variety of applications of this nature. We also know that there's a lot of startups using Air, so we're seeing large company adoption, like eBay, like the White House. It's funny, I get interesting emails. South Africa, if you want to fill out your taxes in South Africa, you now use an Air application to do that. And Poland. So it's a lot of fun seeing, now that we've gone from the V1 to 250 million downloads, all sorts of interesting new people, large companies and small, moving to Air, trying and using it to take advantage of the beautiful experiences and the power of being outside the browser. We also, as a funny note, a lot of teams inside Adobe use Air, so that's one of the things that keeps us honest. I get a lot of feedback from my internal partners, people building interesting applications. But more about this contextual application piece. What we know is that PCs are great and powerful, but there's a lot of devices exploding and growing that are no longer just the PC. Cell phones are huge. More devices and form factors are coming into the market, and PCs remain important and not a small percentage of the space. But we know that it's essential that we work to make it easier for you to reach more screens. With that in mind, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, my job changed. Inside Adobe, we used to have 2 separate businesses. We had the platform, whose job in life was to build FlashBlare, was to build Air, was to make sure these experiences worked great on the desktop. And then we had another team, another business unit, very large, hundreds of people in mobile. We had a mobile business unit. And separate code, separate people, solving the same problems on phones. So 2 years ago, we looked at this, and we looked at how there was going to be so many devices, desktop and mobile, and we realized it was too important for it to be separate. And the story, the thing that has to work, is that you can move between desktop and mobile easily, because you already have the skill set. You know how to work in one place. We want to make sure you can work in both. And so the idea was that we merged these 2 businesses. We merged these 2 engineering teams. We actually merged the code bases. So now the idea is much simpler. It's just, if you want to be inside the browser, whether you are on a desktop, a phone, a television, a tablet, I don't care. If you're inside the browser, you use Flash. Then if you're outside the browser, well, then you need a way to install and uninstall applications. You need ways to access the file system, a database. You need a slightly different security model. You have a little more freedom, a little more power. And so we've added those things. And when we add those things, we call it Air. So this is now one code base, one group inside Adobe, any screen, inside the browser, Flash, outside the browser, desktop, mobile, or otherwise, Air. So this is an example. We've worked with the New York Times on an application that we call the Times Reader. I know a lot of people in Adobe demo this application. I'm just curious, with hands, have you seen the New York Times Reader from the Air application before? Yes, no? Only a few. Okay, maybe I'll pause for a moment and do a quick demonstration. This application is something that was built for the New York Times. Doing a little bit of preparation before the demo here. But what you see is that the New York York Times has this interesting problem. They want to make sure that they can build some application or some way to make money in the new world where people are viewing their content on the internet and not just the newspaper anymore. And so we went and worked with the New York Times, and they built this application called the Times Reader. So what this is this is a new way to look at newspapers in general. It has a few interesting features. One is that it has a whole new look and feel. It resizes very nicely. So you'll notice that the layout changes, the number of columns change, the size of assets change. Everything adjusts based on how much space I give the application to live in. I have a new way of navigating. I can flip between section to section like this. So they thought a lot about how do I take advantage of the good things about being in a newspaper, as well as the good things about being on a computer and having that flexibility, and how can I bring them together and marry the two. And so that's what we're seeing here with this New York Times Reader application. There's this way to flip from section to section, which you see on the far left. But there's also a nice way to, I have these images of my parents, opening a big newspaper on the table at breakfast with coffee and flipping, and some of this was the inspiration for being able to flip from section to section and skim the paper this way. So they worked on new navigation models. They worked on different ways to look at this. There's a lot less links and information in this, in the sense that if you look at a website, or the New York Times website, or your average newspaper that you may read online, it has links everywhere. There's links that are advertisements, there's links to other sections, there's links to other articles. And one of the things that they found when thinking about this design again from the ground up was that they wanted to change that and change the navigation to be much more clean, much more simple. There's also a lot less advertising, but the advertising they do have is larger and easier to read and more pronounced. They also added the ability to look at this offline. So I have Wi-Fi across the street, or across the room, in Adobe's offices. I don't have network here. That's okay, because it still has the newspaper from the last time I synchronized it, so I didn't open this since Tuesday, but you can see that this is Tuesday's newspaper, is the latest that I have. And I know that, and I can read this on the airplane, in this office where I have no network, and it loads instantly, and I can get to it right away. So even if I do have network, I don't have to wait for all the new content to come in. I can start reading or consuming right away. And my favorite part too is that you can also play the crossword inside the application. That's very important. So what did this mean for the Times? Why did they bother doing this? Right? So they now see good advertising revenue from this application, but they're also seeing something else that's interesting. They're seeing the website is free. They have a subscription, which is €4 or €5 a month, a week rather. And then now they're able to sell this roughly halfway at $250 per week subscription. So what we're seeing here is this is a new business model. By building an application, by changing the experience, by delivering the information in a way that's compelling to their audience, they're able to actually find another way to monetize the application. So with that in mind, funny thing about the New York Times is this is only one of many investments they're making. Right? They have the Times Reader, which we just talked about. They have the Times on the Kindle. They have an iPhone application. They work on this thing called the Chumby, which I don't know if you've seen, but it's lots of fun. So they're everywhere, they're all over the place, and they still have this funny thing called a newspaper. So this is what we mean by a contextual application. You can build content. Yes?
I haven't seen the entire New York Times demo, but I'm wondering how exactly is the paying model worked out? So as a customer, what's the flow to pay and subscribe, and how does it work exactly?
That's a good question. Let me show you very quickly. I can come back to this application, and what you'll see is that as I'm flipping through a lot of this content, notice the international section has a padlock, and a lot of the sections have locks. And so I download the application for free. Anything that has a padlock, I get previews. I get the first article and then little bits of the next articles. And you see here, there's a subscription preview here, right? It says I can subscribe here for $3.45 per week. I can click Learn More and go through the subscription workflow. And I also see this in the articles that are locked out. So if I go to international and I flip to the next page, I get a little bit of information. And if I want to read more, this is another opportunity for me to subscribe to the Times Reader application. So they put places, as you look at the content, the natural place where you want to, now is the time to pay. They've added that link, that hook. I could show you more of the process if I had internet, but if you're online, you then go to the website and you can sort of activate, unlock your application, and then you can log in to continue. I'm having trouble with
No, just connect, hook you up.
oh, okay. That's okay. That said, well, we talk to the Times a lot. So they have all these different ways of building their applications. And they're doing tons of different languages to make this happen now. So this is built in Air. This is built native to the Kindle. This is built in Objective-C, the language you have to use for the iPhone. This is built using Flashlight. These two are built using HTML. I had a good talk with them. They actually were building their mobile application just for the website, just for North America. They have 9 different versions of their HTML website because the screens change, the browsers are all just a little bit different. There's the BlackBerry with the keyboard, there's the BlackBerry without the keyboard, there's, the list goes on. And so they have to spend a lot of time, even when the screen size is similar, even where they're using the HTML and it's the same language. So our vision, our goal with what we're doing with Flash and Air and the Flash platform is to take all of this content and make sure you can build all of it using Flash and using Air. Adobe provides the runtimes, and we're using the same code base for it, so that as you move from platform to platform, it should be very consistent. Now, does this mean that you write the New York Times once, and it runs exactly the same in all these places? No, I mean, it can't. It turns out that as we talk to you, and as we talk to designers, what we're hearing is that this is difficult, and that you want on the desktop to look like a desktop application. And on the iPhone, you want to look like an iPhone application. And in the browser, it should respect being a website. And the way you show design and user experience in the phone may be the same for some applications, but it's also in many cases going to be different as well. So we want to make sure that it's one tool chain, it's one language, so you don't have to build an HTML team and a Kindle team and an Objective-C team and a 4th team, because that starts getting very expensive if you're the New York Times or if you're a developer house selling your services. We want to make sure you simply have one. And Enrique here is kind enough to show another demo that's been done with the Times, where we actually worked with them to build an application for mobile, again using Flash. And this application has a navigation model that makes sense on a mobile phone, and this is working inside the browser. You can scroll through sections. They thought very carefully about the design. They used a similar team who was using the Times Reader. And so is it the same experience? No, not exactly. Would you have the same experience browsing on the Android device and then on a RIM handset or on another handset in the future that supports Flash and Air? Absolutely. And so, you will show us, you will prove where you can build the same things and where it has to be different, right? I have ideas, but as these products enter the market, that's going to be the real test, and we'll see exactly where you can reuse the same content and where you have to make changes. But the early results we're seeing are promising. With the applications like the games I showed, like the Fickle Blocks, like The Alchemist, we're seeing small amounts of work required to move from one screen to another, and that's the general goal. So, just one or two more slides, and then I'll be moving on to the next people. But the idea here is that we talked a bit about the applications for the iPhone in the demo. So we've seen over 50 apps that are live and shipping in the store today. Over 50,000 launches so far and counting. We're working with a few of our developer partners to make sure we're getting some data about how much these applications are being used.
And Richard will do a whole session.
Yeah, a lot more on that, on how to build the applications, what it looks like, what's the workflow. I just talk at a high level and wave my hand. Some quotes. So I won't read these for you, but what we're seeing is we're talking to people who are building these first applications and getting their feedback. What's it like building these applications in Air? How does it feel moving from the iPhone to Android? Has the experience been positive? And there's lots of text here, so I'll give you a moment to look and see if there's anything that jumps out at you. But what we're seeing right now is we're seeing generally very positive feedback about the next version of Creative Suite and how it's being used to create these applications. And now that we're working on Android, we want to make sure that it's just as easy to move from one platform to the next, from iPhone to Android, from Android to iPhone. So we thought about this one application in particular called Chroma Circuit, which is a fairly good demonstration. Excellent, thank you. So Chroma Circuit is an application, another one that we have working, any excuse to come back to the phone, but it's another application that we have working on the iPhone and on the Droid. And you can see it side by side here, once it loads. And you can see this application now works the same on both devices. It's particularly dark, so it's a little bit hard to see. But it is, in fact, the same experience. It looks like the screenshot that you're seeing here. And the question is, what changes when you move from one to the other? Well, you do have to repackage. So Adobe's tools will help you create an IPA for the iPhone, whether you're on Windows or Mac. And it will also help you create the APK you need to deploy on Android. So that's an important change. Some applications require some updates for screen size. So that's important to keep in mind, that screens do change and an application needs to be able to adjust at least a little bit if you want it to have adaptability. If you make it for exactly one resolution, well, we are seeing the screen sizes change relatively frequently in the market. And this is just a fun note, is that this application was created before we even started the Android development. So it was made for the iPhone when we only had the iPhone work, and it was very interesting to see it move from iPhone to Android with a small investment. When we talked to the developers who are making these applications, some applications run with little or no change. And if an application is designed carefully, it's possible to do that. We're working on a Flex framework version for mobile, which will also help make that even easier. So that's in our plans coming in the future. We showed a sneak at Max in October. And then we're trying to make sure, the goal is to make it so you can migrate your applications at low cost. So it's not move from Java to Objective-C to go from Android to iPhone. It's still use the same tools, still use the same assets, still use the same languages and the Air product to do so. So the idea here is that we create the native packaging. So you start with a .air file. The tools create a .air. And then when you're ready to move and you realize which platforms you want to support, you can use it to create an IPA for deployment on the iPhone. So once you create the IPA, you go to the iTunes Connect that Apple provides to post an application to the store. And then for Chrome, for Android, for example, you can create an APK. And then that APK can go to whatever marketplace supports APKs. So the Android marketplace is one that we're hoping to support. Still working on the final parts of that product now. And then there will be other markets that essentially anyone who's designed their environment to support the packaging native to Android should support Air. So this is just a quick overview to get you started. Richard and a few others will come and talk more about the details of how do I create these applications, what does a packager look like. But I can also take a few minutes now to answer any questions.
Preguntas. Cualquier pregunta sobre Air que tengáis, quejas que tengáis.
Any questions like, well, any complaints?
There we go.
No complaints. You said that you're building a Flex framework for mobile, for Air. Will it be the same code base as Flex 4 or will it be different?
So they're starting off, we're building it with Flex 4 as a starting point. And so there'll be some places where it's exactly the same and some places where it's a little bit different. There's probably going to be some custom versions of the components that are designed more for small screen size. You know, charting, for example, will probably look more different. But they start from the Flex 4 as where they begin, and then they'll be designing a framework specific to mobile. And they'll be working to keep them as much the same as possible, but they won't be 100%.
Okay.
But the class structure, the class hierarchy will evolve from Flex 4.
Behind the scenes will be the same, I mean, the mechanism to move things and that stuff, and then the visual appearance will be customized for devices.
That's right.
Is that? Okay.
We will also do, we will take out from the framework, from the Flex mobile framework, the stuff that you don't need for mobile, that you now leverage a lot in desktop development. For instance, there's a lot of containers, canvases and whatnot that you might not need on a mobile. That takes a lot of space in terms of framework, and we just take it out just so it runs better and faster.
Yeah, a lot of the early work that they did on performance benchmarking showed that like changing the skins, having adaptive skins that change at runtime, is a massive overhead. So there'll be things like that that'll go. I mean, most people decide what their application looks like when they build it.
You mean
So,
liquid layouts?
Oh no, so the layout management that'll be handled, that's definitely in. But you can apply different skins
Mhm.
using Flex4 at runtime, just swap them out, and that's got a bit of an overhead.
Any others?
Any other questions? Sí, please.
I'm curious, as you work with people like the New York Times, my sense is that we're sort of designing for devices as they come to market. But if you can project a few years down the line, when we have the tablets and we have the phone, we have the desktop, in terms of user experience and efficiency and development time, what do you think, where's the best place to start?
Interesting. So we thought a lot about this because the number of screens seems to be going up and up and up. Whether it's an iPod or it's a television that now has an application store, there's more and more screens that you're going to have access to. And the theory we have about this right now is that if you're starting from scratch with a new application, it is advisable to begin with the most constrained environment you can. So the environment that's the most challenging to develop design experience for, which is usually the smallest. So we recommend beginning with the phone where you have, and getting your design ideas and making sure that the look and feel is right there. And then you can add to it and make it more rich and more beautiful and more interesting on the bigger screens. We're seeing the Times has done this sort of backwards. You know, if you look at all those applications, they share the Times look and feel. They share the Times font. They share the logos. Some aspects of interaction are the same. And we think that it would be easiest to design that at first in mobile and then build it out and make it more and more and more as you get to the bigger screens and the more power and flexibility. Any other questions? Well, then I leave you with one last brief demo. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Apologies.
In Spanish,
Sí.
sorry.
I'll do the translation. Dime.
¿Podremos reproducir FLVs en AIR?
Yeah, the question is whether we can reproduce FLVs in Air for mobile.
En the iPhone.
Yes, so you can use FLVs in Air for Mobile, including the iPhone. On the iPhone in particular, there's interesting restrictions from Apple's operating system, where they make it so it's not possible inside an application to use their hardware decoding for the H.264 codec. So if you use H.264, you will not be able to have access to Apple's hardware decoding. For other codecs, you will be able to use FLV, and you're doing it in software, but for many codecs, the performance is reasonable in that environment.
I saw a few days ago a demo of Acrobat Connect Mobile, and in that demo, we can show that the iPhone is streaming video without changing the application. You know, how can it be possible that?
How could that be possible? So the idea was, how could we make an application that works on the iPhone and Android and streams video without change? And so what ends up happening is that we make sure that we can use a codec that Air provides for video on both the iPhone and Android. And the result is that the same action script, the same calls you're making, function for actually making the video render. And so that's why the Connect Pro mobile demo works on both of those platforms.
We were actually trying to, estamos intentando sacar esa demo, pero como hay muchos que estáis conectados al Wi-Fi, no nos dan un iPad. Si queréis luego os la enseño.
It's coming. Any final questions? And I'll do one more demo to finish after that. All right, so I just wanted to show one thing which is fun. We talk about the Times and sometimes about serious applications. We see a lot of interesting branding and things. One of the things you can do with Air is you can have people walk across the screen, do crazy things, and so she's kind of fun. It's entertaining. So I just like that one to finish. But thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. And I'll be around a little while longer today to answer any more questions.
Cualquier cosa, coger a Aaron y preguntas. All right.
Thanks.
Chao. Y ahora, el maestro de ceremonias. Xavi os va a enseñar básicamente como pruebas, experimentos que ha estado haciendo con los nuevos APIs del 10.1 para móviles, temas de multitouch, temas de orientación, y Nos va a enseñar las demos, creo que también en, tanto en el iPhone como en el Nexus One.
Sí, tenemos también dos
Veréis que básicamente no, y obviamente algo bastante más techy que lo que hemos estado viendo hasta ahora. Y ya.